According to a new lawsuit, which came out of New York City, it turns out that the FBI has been tracking unvaccinated school teachers using their fingerprints. You heard that right. According to this new lawsuit, the fingerprints of unvaccinated public school teachers, they were tagged by the New York City government, and because of that tag, the Department of Justice, as well as the FBI under them, they flagged these people's fingerprints. And if you think that sounds wild, well, the story actually gets a lot more sobering than that. However, before we dig in through the details of this lawsuit, I should mention that unlike the New York City government, I personally do not discriminate. And so anyone, both vaccinated and unvaccinated alike, are all welcome to smash those like and subscribe buttons in order to force the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to ever more people. Now, back to the lawsuit. To start with, you might remember how during the height of the pandemic madness, just when the total lockdowns were beginning to recede, several cities in America began to heavily discriminate against unvaccinated individuals. Chief among them was New York City, who made it such that if you were not vaccinated, you were not allowed to go inside of a gym, you were not allowed to eat inside of a restaurant, you were not allowed to sit inside of a coffee shop, and most businesses had people set up at their front door in order to check people's papers before they were allowed inside. And this form of general discrimination also translated to city employees, who were given the option of either remaining unvaccinated or keeping their jobs. And while the vast majority of city employees, of course including teachers, complied with this policy, there was a sizable minority who didn't. As you can see from this footage here, that for one reason or another was ignored generally by the legacy news outlets, there were dozens of demonstrations throughout New York City protesting against these mandates. But in the end, the city of New York wound up firing close to 2,000 employees within the Department of Education, including about 1,000 teachers. But here's the kicker. These teachers did not only lose their streams of income, but instead, it looks like they also got onto the FBI's radar. Specifically, here's what attorney John Birch, who is currently representing these unvaccinated school teachers in a lawsuit against the city, here's what he said in a court hearing about a week and a half ago. Quote, "When the city puts these problem codes on employees who have been terminated because of their unconstitutional policies, not only do they have this flag in their files, but their fingerprints are sent with that flag to the FBI and the New York Criminal Justice Services, so it impacts their ongoing ability to get employment at other places." Essentially, because these public school teachers refused to take the shot, the city government not only fired them, but they also flagged these teachers with what's known as a problem code, which can make it harder for them to get a job in the future. And when a teacher gets tagged like this, the problem code is automatically sent over to the FBI in the form of a flag. And so the teachers who refuse the shot will now have a flag in their file, which will impact their ability to get employment in the future. And because all New York City Department of Education employees are fingerprinted at the beginning of their careers, their file will now contain both the flag as well as a copy of their fingerprints. Meaning that because these teachers refused to take the shot, with many of them doing so based on their religious or spiritual convictions, they're going to have a harder time finding a job in the future because, among other reasons, the FBI is tracking them using their fingerprints so that they will be found and flagged no matter where in the country they move to. Now, the fact that this was actually happening was initially discovered by an investigative journalist named Betsy Combier, who submitted her findings in the form of an affidavit that was included as a part of this lawsuit. Here's how she described this process, how it technically was playing out behind the scenes. Quote, "I found out that the Department of Education has right now an agency called the Office of Personnel Investigation. And what they do is they have employees of the Department of Education who, forgive me, call themselves investigators, but they're not. So they work for the Office of Personnel Investigation, and when they get an accusation from anybody, it doesn't matter who, well, the principals send it to them, but the original complaint against somebody could be made by anybody that employee did something wrong. Then they start putting the code on the file, and I think that's outrageous because no one is told why it's there, what they did, and in most times, in my experience, the person did nothing wrong." And so using this mechanism that was already in place, the teachers who did not have a valid vaccination card were immediately flagged with a problem code that was similarly sent over to the FBI as well as the Department of Justice more broadly. And as you can imagine, the teachers who found themselves in this situation, who learned that this was actually happening, were shocked to say the least. For instance, Ms. Rochelle Garcia, who was a New York City public school teacher for 15 years prior to getting fired because she refused to take the shot, well, she said that the revelation about these problem codes left her infuriated. Here's what she said during an interview over on Fox News. Quote, "This is both outrageous and infuriating because my first question to the government or whatever is basically, what did I do? What kind of criminal activity did I participate besides denying something that I felt that was not right for me? Religiously, mentally, I just didn't want anything experimental on my body. So what criminal activity does that persist? I don't understand. Like with, why am I being flagged? Why is my fingerprint being sent to the FBI? But actually, the scope of this government tracking goes a lot further than what we've described thus far. Because you might be watching this episode right now, and you might be thinking to yourself, hey, that's pretty bad, but at least I don't live in New York City, or I'm not a public school teacher. Therefore, I'm not being tracked. But here's the thing. You likely are wrong, because the CDC has recently revised their medical codes to indeed track the unvaccinated all over the entire country. But right before I explain what these new codes are all about, let me quickly show you this beautiful coin. This right here is an American Walking Liberty 1 ounce gold coin. And typically I order at least one of these from our sponsor, American Hartford Gold, every single month. The reason I do so is because, as you likely know, the inflation rate in this country is the highest that has been in, the last 40 years now. Everything like the price of food, the price of housing, the price of gas is absolutely going through the roof. And in fact, market experts like the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, he's not only predicting a recession, but he's even using words like unprecedented economic hurricane. And so listen, I absolutely do not give you any financial advice, but I would recommend that you do what I do, which is pick up the phone and call American Hartford Gold. Their super friendly staff can help you diversify your portfolio by either getting physical gold and physical silver delivered directly to your doorstep like I do, or deposited directly into your IRA and your 401k accounts. They make the entire process super simple. And actually, besides me, they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau with quite literally thousands of satisfied clients around the country. And best of all, to our viewers, to the viewers of Facts Matter, they are currently throwing in $2,500 worth of free silver on your first qualifying order. So giving them a call is an absolute no-brainer. So pick up the phone and call 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352. Or text Roman to 65532. Their link will also be down in the description box below. And now let's head on back to the studio. That's right. As I alluded to a moment ago, the CDC has recently rolled out a new set of medical diagnosis codes, which include new codes for people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Specifically, among the newly revised index of codes are 3 codes meant to tag those who have not received the shots. One of the codes is Z28310, which, according to the CDC, quote, may be assigned when the patient has not received at least 1 dose of any COVID-19 vaccine, meaning they're totally unvaccinated. Then another code, Z28311, is for those who are partially vaccinated, meaning that they received at least 1 dose of some vaccine, but didn't receive enough doses to meet the definition of being fully vaccinated. And then there's Z2839 for, quote, other under immunization status, which is a blanket for anyone else who is not whatever the CDC at the moment deems to be fully vaccinated. All 3 of these new medical codes fall under a new subcategory that the CDC created within this new index called under immunization for COVID-19 status, with the goals of this new subcategory being, according to the CDC, to quote, track people who are not immunized or only partially immunized. Now, if that sounds surprising to you, let me back up for a moment and explain how we got to this point. Back in September of 2021, there was a large meeting to revise the ICD10, which is the large index of diagnosis codes that are used by doctors here in the US. These are the codes that are written on a patient's chart and recorded into their medical histories. These codes essentially help to facilitate things like insurance claims, billing, as well as to help one doctor at one medical center know what another medical center in another part of the country found out about this particular patient. That's because these codes follow the patient wherever in the country they might go to. They're a part of their medical history. And here in the US, this index of codes, the ICD-10, is typically updated once a year. And during the meeting in 2021, CDC officials proposed adding new codes to this index in order to track the unvaccinated. Back then, during that meeting, here's what Dr. David Berglund, a CDC official, here's what he said regarding the need for these new codes. Quote, people have now been having immunizations for a number of months, and these provide protection for people who are immunized. But there has been interest expressed in being able to track people who are not immunized or who are only partially immunized. At the current time, there can be considered to be a significant modifiable risk factor for morbidity and for mortality, and it can be of interest for clinical reasons, as well as being a value for public health reasons to be able to track this. And the meeting participants were by and large down with the idea. As a response to that proposal, Kristen Ballant, who is a supervisor at Trinity Health and a member of this meeting, here's what she said, quote, "I definitely think we would support this. We are currently already seeing physicians documenting unimmunized for COVID-19 in our records." And indeed, 7 short months later, on April 1st of 2022, the 3 codes were added to the ICD10. As you can see up on your screen, they created a new subcategory as well as 3 new codes to mark those who are either unvaccinated or quote-unquote undervaccinated. Furthermore, besides these 3 new codes that we already went through, there's another code that was added during the pandemic, which is code Z7185, which is related to vaccine counseling. Specifically, that code is used for parents who refuse the COVID vaccine for their children. Here's how a healthcare official described this new code during the ICD-10 meeting, quote, "I know that we track that for families where they've refused to vaccinate their children for one reason or another. And certainly, we've tried to re-educate and to keep trying to find opportunities to give the vaccines." And so, what this all means is that if a person has visited a hospital within the last year now, and if they happen to be either unvaccinated, quote unquote undervaccinated, or if they didn't allow their kids to get vaccinated for COVID, then most likely their medical charts now reflect as much. And this medical history will be following these individuals wherever they go. If you'd like to read more about these medical codes from the CDC, or if you'd like to read about the FBI's tracking of unvaccinated public school teachers using their fingerprints, I'll throw all those links down into the description box below this video. And lastly, I'd love to know your thoughts about these topics. Are these new codes by the CDC useful, since they give doctors an added data point about each individual patient, or is it just not appropriate? And what about the FBI's tracking of these public school teachers using their fingerprints? Do you think that's appropriate, or is it a gross violation of these people's rights? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them later tonight, as well into the week. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.